I need supports to have to clear the room. Stand up and walk now.
Hello and welcome to The Watch. My name is Chris Ryan. I am an editor at TheRinger.com, and joining me on the roof of the Pitt, it's Andy Greenwald!
It's not just us up there today, buddy.
No, man. What's going on, brother?
You want to tease what's happening on today's podcast?
It's a special one. Joining us today on The Watch, Noah Wyle. Dr. Robbie himself from the Pitt is here. He's going to talk to us a little bit about the first season and especially the finale. He was a pleasure to speak with. Noah is he's just such a kind and genuine and sincere person. And it was just immediately you could tell he was a real one.
It was awesome. And I also should say, off air, I do have a little red patch on my back that I was concerned about, and he was really kind.
Yeah.
So just take a quick look. He palpated a little bit,
A little bit of housekeeping. You can email us at thewatch@spotify.com. Follow us on Instagram, thewatchpod_. You can watch us on Ringer-TV on YouTube. You can watch us also on Spotify. I have a lot of stuff just kind of news and notes at the top. We're also going to talk a little bit about Your Friends and Neighbors, a new show on Apple TV+.
Guess what?
What?
I feel like there's some connective tissue between the Pitt and Your Friends and Neighbors that I'm excited to weave for you.
This is what it's all about. It's all about me. It's about me kind of just dribbling the ball up the court and just making sure you're set up in the spot you like.
Here's the thing. Right before we hit record, we were joking about how we are entering the time of the off season. Well, there's always an off season. In whatever sports off season it is, there's a rash of videos of like Ben Simmons flexing and dunking in the gym. Be like, Ben Simmons is going to be a problem this season. My version of that was yesterday, where I was just crushing tape. I was just watching show after show after show.
You tried to get out of it by asking me to get a beer.
I did. But then I felt like I was showing up for you regardless. So I just want you and our listeners to know.
It's not for me. This is not you're not doing me emotional labor. You get paid to do this podcast, right?
I mean, it's an ongoing negotiation, but I believe it's showing up regardless.
Okay. I want to talk to you about something a little bit outside of our purview.
Oh, okay. You're just going to throw this to me. Okay.
I mentioned this maybe at the end of last podcast, but I do think it's worth talking about.
Okay.
Which is the fact that a company called Colossus has reanimated direwolves, long extinct.
Oh, yeah. I did want to talk about this.
And what this means for the Game of Thrones industrial content complex, and also, humanity. The fact that we can reanimate long extinct animals, and also I need to tell scientists something.
Yeah,
I know you guys
want to talk to camera, direct to camera,
right to you. I know you guys are under a little bit of fire right now, right?
That's fair.
So I'm not trying to pile on, and far be it from me on an episode where we're also talking to Noah Wyle, who has made an entire television show that's trying to stress the importance of objective medical fact. I'm not here to tell you guys how to do what you do. But if you are working at a company that's actively trying to reanimate direwolves, and you're like, God, we got 3 of them. What a fucking huge win for us. And it's high fives, and everybody, maybe you crack open a cold one, and somebody goes, hey man, what should we name these direwolves? I don't think Romulus, Remus, and Khaleesi is the message you want to send, because that makes it feel like you kind of lost the tail on the direwolf already. And then they're like, we've got a 3,000 acre farm. These direwolves are just roaming. I'm like, this is how it starts, dog. It starts with Romulus and Remus and Khaleesi. This is how Jurassic Park
we're going to make
starts.
A park, is what they're saying. So a couple things. First of all, I really was surprised that of all the problems inherent in this, naming rights was your big one? I
just think it's sometimes scientists, they dare nature to punch back.
I see. I thought you were saying that,
and you don't have to give this direwolf 2 mythical names and 1 name from Game of Thrones.
You would have preferred Quicken.com.
No, just
Wolf.
Spot, Archie, and Frank.
I want to unpack all those choices.
I think you limit the possibility of
revolt.
When you keep it to come on, let's domesticate these direwolves.
If Spartacus's name had been Jerry, problem solved.
Yeah,
you name him a sick name like Spartacus.
Do you see what I'm saying?
I do.
It's kind of I think Elon does this a lot, where he'll get a product and then he's just it's the Cybertruck or whatever, and it's I don't know, you're pushing us towards Blade Runner too fast.
I see. Pump the brakes.
Yeah.
I'm with you on all of your points. First thought, best thought, has anyone checked on Mallory?
I haven't checked on her. I talked to her yesterday, but this didn't come up. Yeah.
Somehow this didn't come up. I've gone on a different...
This is true, by the way. There's like, you can now... Also, I would say that there's a New York article about this. I think there's a bunch of other articles. And then Slate wrote what's like the problems with the direwolf reanimation. They zagged.
I'm waiting for someone to do the problems with the direwolf reanimation discourse.
Yeah.
What everyone's getting wrong.
About direwolves? I didn't know those were real things, by the way.
Direwolves?
Yeah.
I can't pretend that I did either. First of all, I do think the direwolves have been really silent about the impact of some of Trump's recent executive actions. Oh, like that's an excuse.
This is their first president.
God, that's true. I'm going to segue in a way I was already going to.
Yeah.
It's the same way with my second child. But I've gone on a different journey with this because, anyone who is a parent will relate to this, that like you basically spend a day as a parent like running a light dustbuster through news and culture for anything you could potentially tell them.
Oh, to like have something that, did you see Olivia Rodrigo did this?
Right. And then 6 minutes later, it's just the sounds of chewing, So it's like, what else can we bring into this? So I was like, guys, funny story. Science, that class you don't like? Guess what those rascals have done now?
Yeah.
And older daughter thought it was interesting, thought the picture was cute. Younger daughter, at 4 a.m, I can't sleep. Okay, why? I was having no trouble.
Uh-huh.
I can't sleep because of that thing you told me. I'm like, about Olivia Rodrigo dating Louis Partridge? She's like, the wolves.
Because she thought they were outside?
She was so upset, I think, just on a conceptual, existential level, that then I had to do a little more digging. And these are not actually reanimated direwolves, right?
They like rearranged the DNA of gray wolves, right?
First of all, I love how blasé we are about that. Oh, it's just another jerk-off DNA rearranging. Get back to me when you do something real, Poindexter. It's not. No, yes, they were just like, what if these wolves had different colored fur?
Uh-huh.
And then they're like, look, everyone, it's Prometheus, the dire wolf. Anyone have any notes? No, we're just going to leave it here. No one said where the island was either, right?
Where?
Where it's not an island, but like the park where they're keeping them. They're keeping it real quiet.
I would imagine it's in Norway.
Well, you can imagine all you want, but they didn't say, why? Mu Deng.
What's that mean?
That guy got too popular. They don't want press and paparazzi coming to these dire wolves.
Well, these guys have like more space than I could even dream to have.
These wolves?
Yeah.
I know. Do they how much we pay for square footage? Did you see Colossus's hit list for what's coming next?
No.
So apparently on their docket are the dodo bird, which is cute.
Yeah.
I feel like that could trend.
I think we need to just worry about the birds we do have.
Like because they're coming for us?
Or because they're like, they get hunted, they go extinct.
And 5G power lines, right?
Wind power.
You said it, but I'm not shaking my head. And the woolly mammoth they're interested in.
Now, where would you put that guy?
Where?
Yeah.
Like on Earth?
Could you engineer a woolly mammoth to be like, I'm in Miami?
Now I'm thinking about like, what was that? We brought this up before, but in the 80s, there was that surf brand that had like all the animated animals surfing. Like the monkey on the... So now I'm thinking about like, what if a woolly mammoth could surf? Listen, if that was our problem in the world, these woolly mammoths like the beach too much.
Well, he just wants to be somewhere where entrepreneurship is valued.
We have to move on, but I do want to know about like, your point about this is the only president they've known. Like, do you think someone has to sit down and explain like founder culture to these wolves about like, here's how the economy works now? It doesn't.
Does anyone know that?
It doesn't. But that's awesome.
So that was my big thing.
Okay. Any other disciplines that you'd like to lecture before we get into it?
No, I was wondering whether like you would sort of start to psychologically prepare yourself for Last of Us. And that's coming this Sunday. We'll talk about it on Monday. Whether or not I see you nodding kind of out of the corner of my eye in a way that means you don't want to talk about this. But I will say that I rewatched Andor with my mom.
I love talking about things you do with your mom. What are you talking about?
So we rewatch. I was like not going to do that. I don't typically go back and rewatch seasons, but I thought she would really get a kick out of it, and I did find it helpful.
Yes.
And I do resent, but also acknowledge the usefulness of refreshing yourself about a show that was on 2 to 3 years ago.
Yeah, for sure.
But I don't know if I'm going to do that with Last of Us. I feel like I remember pretty clearly what happened.
You sort of get it.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that might make a small distinction, and yes, we will be talking about that show on Monday, is that from everything I've gathered about the second season, it picks up 5 years later. It is not a what's the next second of these people's lives.
You should play the video game with your younger daughter, see how that goes over.
I'm just thought you'd find this some interesting conversation. You know those mushrooms on the pizza? Well, guess what they're doing to them? Yeah.
Her standing outside your bedroom going click, 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 click.
Is that
the clickers?
Is that the clicking sound of the from the show Last of Us?
You should rewatch it.
Have you watched ahead yet? Have you watched Last of Us yet?
I was not granted a screener.
Wow, that's awkward.
Yeah.
Do you want mine? No, I definitely wasn't. I definitely wasn't.
Nothing much else for you. I just want to say 100 Foot Wave is coming back.
That's so cool.
In May, I think.
So they've basically just been camped out of Nazaré, just filming our guys this whole time. Just since the first season, they've just been accumulating new footage. And
well, I wonder where else they went. Don't they usually have we went over here for a while, and then of course it was Nazaré season. But I've said 100 times, I hope Chris Smith makes 50 seasons of this.
I feel like I should rewatch season 2 though, just to get
just to see where Nicole's head's at.
Don't get me started. Our queen.
Let's talk about. Why don't we do Your Friends and Neighbors as a little bit of a preview?
Okay,
then we'll talk about the finale of The Pit. Then Noah's going to join us. So if you want, you can skip the Friends and Neighbors part if you haven't watched it yet, or if you're going to watch it but want to hear us later about it. We'll keep that brief. Talk about the finale. Talk about The Pit season 1, and then we'll get to our interview with Noah.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, for Your Friends and Neighbors, I think it's a show we're going to keep coming back to and talking about. So generally light preview. I don't think we're going to spoil anything.
More premise than anything else.
Yeah.
Friends and Neighbors is a new show on Apple from Jonathan Tropper, writer and creator of the show. Really interesting career. Mm-hmm. Has done some shows that you really love, Banshee and Warrior. Also is a published novelist. Very, very kind of has his hand in a bunch of different parts of Hollywood. He's done blockbuster feature script writing for the Adam Project. He's kind of persisted in making these adult-minded dramedies, like This Is Where I Leave You, and it's done, obviously, like I mentioned, some TV stuff, but kind of is a very much hot screenwriter of the moment, even though he's been in the business for a very long time.
Including being brought on to the Star Wars universe.
Yeah, so he's got a Star Wars script, he's doing an adventure movie with John Cena, it has a lot of stuff going, but this seems like a very personal project to him, and also very much like a statement of purpose from him. It is a dramedy, I guess. I'd say it's a drama with some funny elements.
Yeah. Starring
Jon Hamm in his first leading TV role since Mad Men.
Yep.
Pretty significant there. Obviously, he's been on Morning Show. He's been on Landman. But this is the first time that he has led a show, and it is... You watch these episodes and you're like, God damn, Jon Hamm's getting out of that car, and then he's going into that building. He's carrying every scene. He's almost in every shot.
Mm-hmm.
That alone, honestly, is worth the price of admission, but there's a lot of other stuff to recommend about this show. What did you think of it?
Well, let's say, 2 episodes are premiering tonight from a 9-episode first season. Significantly, and we'll circle back to this point, it's already been renewed for a second season, which I think is going into production this month. Premise is pretty gangbusters and great. Hamm plays Andrew Cooper. Sidebar. Do you know a lot of people who are called their last name nicknames by even their wives and closest people in their family?
And also, I just don't have a cool last name for that. You could call me Ryan, but no, there's no Chris Ryan. That wouldn't work.
No, but also when we go out to dinner, Phoebe's not CR, pass the bread rolls. I mean, unless I'm missing something, right? That doesn't really work. I also, honestly, on some level, I resent a little bit the lengths that this character goes to avoid being called Andy. I just feel a little okay. We do the best we can. Anyway, he is a what Tom Wolfe called a master of the universe,
investment banker, stock trader, yeah,
who finds himself sort of over leveraged with a wife and kids and an increasing series of expensive houses just to keep up. basically with his friends and neighbors. And in the pilot, he's now suddenly divorced and loses his job and turns to robbing said friends and neighbors in order to continue his lifestyle. And I have to say, I'm glad we're talking about this show in an episode where we're talking about the Pitt.
Okay.
Because there was something truly exciting and fun for me about firing up a show that was designed to go multiple seasons and also was already planning on its second season. It would be back in a year. It's an old-fashioned feeling, right? That like, okay, yeah, let's see how far this thing can go. This has got a strong cast. It's got a strong premise. It's got a voice. And that feeling of like getting on the ride is at this point, it's like a market inefficiency, how few times we get to do that. There was an expansiveness to the show and the voice and the world that was honestly kind of exhilarating, knowing that all of the irons being put in the fire in the first hour, and there may be a few too many, we can talk about that. I'm not already doing the mental calculus of how are we going to land this in 6 hours? How is this going to be resolved in 7 hours? That was really, really fun for me. And for it to come out of the gate with a lot of confidence and wit, and Tropper, as you said, like knows this world, has stakes, emotional stakes in the world, and is just a clever and good, but also efficient and let's keep things moving kind of writer. I was super in, even though I think we probably have a few bumps in the early.
Yeah, I think it was the thing that I responded to the most was the voice. And there's a lot of a voice because Jon Hamm narrates a lot of the episodes. With these highly stylized, very cynical kind of like just really like calloused kind of here's what it's really like and here's what the problem is and
what are we doing?
And I almost admired the distinctiveness of his POV, which honestly is like incredibly rich white man who's got woman troubles and money troubles. Like, but you actually, for the most part, in a lot of like contemporary television, I think that gets sanded down a lot. And I think it is getting sanded down on this show a bit.
Yeah, I think that's what we both want to talk about.
The sort of state of the anti-hero is a really interesting conversation to have about this show versus where it came from with Sopranos, but then specifically with Mad Men, because we're talking about Hamm. And it's also interesting to think about Coop in relationship to Don Draper, because Don Draper is purposely such an enigma.
Yep.
And Coop is enigmatic, but is constantly telling you
how
thinking.
he feels and what he thinks, and we're seeing
yeah.
every aspect of him. And also, and I think this is not my favorite aspect of the show, it constantly is pre-apologizing for him potentially doing behavior that is not great. Like, and it's pulling its punches in that way that I find that kind of, honestly, I find that aspect off-putting. The Don Draper part of it, this is the other way that I think the show is similar to The Pitt. When The Pitt premiered, we were like, there are some actors who should not run away from their strengths. There are some actors for whom playing a certain archetype is incredibly rich. There's depth to it, and there's more depth as they age or as they're put into different circumstances. And then you can play with something that most shows don't even get a chance to sniff, which is the audience's pre-existing investment in this person in this type of role that they carry with them from one role to another. So when Dr. Robbie shows up in the pilot of The Pitt, anyone who spent the 90s watching ER is like, I trust this guy.
Yep.
So then what do we do with that?
So when Jon Hamm gets in a Maserati?
When Jon Hamm is sitting at the end of the bar nursing a whiskey, I'm like, yeah, he's been there before.
Yeah.
The show, I think, very boldly does not hide the Don Draperness of it. Like there's a shot early in the pilot where he's, in a suit surrounded by people who aren't dressing as nicely as he is. So he's a little bit out of step with the times, and they crowd around him on an elevator as he's leaving an office. And I'm like, yeah, I've seen this shot before, and I like it. I think it's very interesting also to consider what a quote unquote alpha male looks like from the 60s to the 2020s.
Yeah.
And how some things stay the same, some things are quite changed, and how maybe the middle of all of this has just been eaten away. I really like that aspect of it. And he also, Hamm seems like a great guy and he seems like a good actor. I mean, I know he's a good actor, but also he seems like a good sport to try things like he did in Fargo, like he did in Landman, but he's in his bag. and he seems really animated to be in the show
He's
in a way that
incredible in the
is very
show, and then
compelling.
I think what you're seeing on this one is there's basically like three different things happening. There's a midlife crisis show that's happening that's being largely narrated and acted out by the Hamm character and is about his malaise and his feeling of disconnection as he's living in a rented house while his ex-wife Mel, played by Amanda Peet, lives or dates a ex-NBA player who she had cheated on him with. Coop has a fling going with a recently divorced woman played by Olivia Munn, the character Sam. And then Coop is sort of alienated from his two teenage kids who don't really notice the fact that he no longer lives at the home that they live in. So there's like a family thing going on. Then there is a secondary story, which is the descent into crime and that is also heavily narrated. So we're getting a lot of explication about like how this guy's feeling. And it's very interesting because that is these trapdoors that takes him into different parts of New York City and different elements. And, he's going up to the Bronx to fence stuff. And that's fascinating. Then there is the third layer of the show, which I respectfully will describe as like Shrinking, but in Long Island, where it's a bunch of people who are orbiting this family or this man and their love lives and their wants and desires and some B, C, D, E plots. I probably am least interested in that part, this like sort of expanded community, suburban drama, but I get why they're doing it because it provides a lot of story stuff. What did you think of the kind of like the three different shows, or did any of those feel tonally off to you?
Yes. And let me then also say, we are kind of unused to shows that can find their footing. This, as we said, has been renewed. They're making more. And there are enough smart people in the creative team that I think that the version of the show that we see at the season finale 2 months from now might be addressed or even improved on in future seasons. Like even the shows that this wants to be in the pantheon with, I'm not saying this is like a Hall of Fame show, but it is decidedly and with a lot of intention trying to be a difficult man show, basically, or an heir to that throne. And those shows, some of them had amazing pilots, but they definitely weren't the shows that they ended up with. They ended up being in the first few seasons. So I'm willing to accept some bumps along the road, particularly because when the show hits and there are a couple scenes in the pilot and there's the opening of the second episode that I think I'm like, oh yeah, this is the Maserati version of this. And I am completely locked in. What's interesting, and we know nothing about like actually the development or behind the scenes of this, but it's hard to watch the show, the first 2 episodes, and not feel a familiar hand of Apple and their, what I imagine is their notes-giving process or their priorities within it. Part of that is like every pilot from the last 10 years, from every over-noted pilot from the last 10 years. The pilot begins no less than 4 times. It begins with a flash forward, and then it goes back slightly in time, then it goes back slightly less in time, then it catches up to where we are.
Then it goes back all the way to like his youth. Yeah, because I'm de-aged Hamm.
And all of this... And
try doing that, Colossus.
You ask my friends in Parma, nobody wants de-aged Hamm. Again, I'm saying this with like hopefully some degree of empathy for this. Like that is a note. I mean, it's just everyone's note from pilots. I do think that I think it's starting to turn a little bit where now when executives see a script that says something exciting 6 months earlier, they're like, okay, we
believe you. You can put it at the end of the season.
This has now reached the point of cliche.
Yeah.
But what that comes from is a very real existential terror that if you don't hook people with something interesting or tell people what the show is in 5 minutes, they're just going to go back to YouTube or whatever else they're doing. It feels not confident at this point, especially when you have a show with this pedigree. So that was kind of a bummer. And then similarly, like the pilot has so much to do to introduce this world, this character, why he is the way he is, what he's going to be doing in series. That's another sort of indicator of where this show exists in the century of television development.
Sure.
Because it used to be, Chris, that like a pilot could be a premise pilot where like we would meet him on the day that he discovers his wife is cheating on him and that he loses his job and then blah,
Yes.
blah, blah. And then the show begins in the series begins in the second episode.
But they have to have him rob somebody in the first episode.
That is a no-no. We have to show
and when we say
people-
rob, I mean he's like stealing from their homes when they're not there. It's not
Yes.
like he's pulling heists.
it's not Give Me the Loot, but with Jon Hamm. So we have to show people what the show is.
Yeah.
So I'm sympathetic to all that. I get it. And it mostly does it with as much grace as possible.
Yeah.
Similarly, the end of the first episode introduces Jon Hamm's Coop's younger sister who has some mental health issues and is heavily medicated and goes off her meds, and he's the only person caring for her, which might prove to be interesting plot-wise and story-wise and definitely gives the actors a different color to play with.
Yeah.
But mostly, in its presence in the pilot, feels like a note being like, I don't think we like this guy. We have to make him likable, even though he's going to do bad things. And that rankles a little bit.
Yeah.
But I will say, after all this sort of slightly critical monologuing, Tropper's writing is really good.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that he's really, really good at is writing smart, good stuff in this ecosystem. You were mentioning his larger CV.
Yeah.
He seems to be willing to play ball as long as they're playing the game that he wants to play. And I think that bodes well for the series.
Yeah. I think we'll definitely be keeping an eye on it. The first 2 episodes go up Thursday night, Friday morning, or whatever the Apple kind of release schedule is. So we'll probably hit this next week, next Thursday, and talk a little bit more about it in depth.
Also, Amanda Peet back.
Amanda Peet's great.
My guy Hoon Lee
I thought he was awesome.
from Banshee, awesome actor.
Yeah.
Awesome actor.
He plays Coop's business manager.
Yeah, he's great.
Yeah.
And the Corbin Burnson sons just continues.
Well, what else do we got on the Suns?
Oh, he was in the Emma Stone Nathan Fielder show. Remember?
Oh, that's right. You excited for the rehearsal?
I'm getting a lot of getting tagged in a lot of stuff.
Sure.
So that's fun for me.
Let's talk about the finale of The Pitt. And obviously, spoilers for this. It's going up Thursday night. The Pitt finale will air this evening. Remarkable season of television. One of the best shows of the year. A huge accomplishment to kind of find this balance between the urgency of a limited series,
Mm-hmm.
but the slow descent into and then loving like embrace of the waters of long form television.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously has been renewed. I think it's probably going to come back as early next year.
Yeah, I think they want to keep a yearly schedule.
This, I think this season peaked and culminated with the Pitt Fest shooting and what the ER had to do to react to that. So in terms of its like, the adrenaline shot,
Mm-hmm.
I think you're asked to go on the same arc as the doctors. And this episode is a lot about them coming down from the day. And so in some ways it's a very it's a very like sort of sensory you're following the same sensory journey that they are, because it's not a TV episode that's about like breaking through the other side and like, oh my God, there's like one more case we have to solve. It's really just like the measles thing, right? And the Code Tan with the guy who works at the hospital who gets crushed by a truck.
Yep.
But for the most part, a lot of like kind of contemplative scenes trying to figure out like where to go from here. What did you think of the finale?
I texted you after I watched it, and we watched it last week to get in front of our Noah interview. I believe I wrote, "This is the only good show." That may have been hyperbole.
You?
I mean, I'm not prone to it, but the experience of watching the show was so engaging and so joyful. In that, like, it woke up parts of my TV watching brain and, more importantly, heart that have just been dormant for a very, very long time. I could probably count on one hand the number of shows that were created with a specific target in mind to try to split the difference between the Prestige era and the opportunities of the Prestige era and the ambition of the Prestige era and the just bare bones, we know how to do this practical nature of storytelling in the broadcast golden era. And they did it. Like, they actually did it. For creative and legal reasons, we won't say that this is a natural heir to any show that we loved in the 90s starring Noah Wyle. But this is the science and magic that Jack Donaghy talked about. And I mentioned that quote when we talked to Noah too, so I'm sorry for repeating myself. But they did that. I find that so remarkable.
Yeah.
I think for me, the most striking thing about this finale was that it didn't continue. The sense of pacing, right, that you were referring to is so masterful. It didn't try to top itself by ending with another bang or another series of bangs. And yet I wrote in my notes and when watching it that the experience of watching the finale was for some reason the most stressful I had all season. Now, to be fair, I did turn off the episode where the child drowned, but beyond that, and the reason why wasn't because of the intensity or the gore or the realism of any medical case. It was because people who I've grown to love through my television screen, in this case, Drs. Robbie and Dr. Mohan, were completely on edge and near crash. And I was so emotionally invested in their well-being, and I was just praying for them not to screw up.
Yeah.
And that felt like old-fashioned TV in another way, too, and also like a kind of a magic trick that the doctors became the patients in terms of my empathy moment to moment with them. Mohan, being so clearly near a crash and so coming so close to inserting herself into opportunities to insert things into people.
As she's basically running on pure adrenaline. Yeah.
Which is how I think didn't we do 3 pods in one day once? So I feel like we can relate. I thought that was incredible.
There's a couple of scenes I wanted to talk to you about. Well, here's one thing I just want to mention. The introduction of the night shift.
Yeah. I've never seen anything like it.
During the shooting, the Pitt Fest shooting, and these new doctors coming on, and the fact that now I am as into Ellis and Shen and Abbott as I was into Langdon, Santos, Whitaker.
Yep.
Is incredible. That was 12 hours into the show. All of a sudden, we get a half a dozen new faces to meet.
The only comparison I can make off the top of my head was the introduction of East Dillon halfway through the series run.
Yeah, but that
Friday
was
Night Lights,
we started a new show.
3 years into the
new
show.
season. Yeah,
they did this in one season.
Yeah.
With no feedback.
Yes.
Again, the leap of faith. And we talked to Noah about this to a degree, but they didn't know when they planned this and wrote it and cast it and shot it how we, the audience, would feel about McKay or Collins and how we would feel about them being there or not being there, let alone how we would feel about their replacements.
Well, I think everybody started the first few episodes and generally speaking, people were like, man, Santos is going to be a tough hang for 15 hours.
Right.
If she just is constantly going up to people and being sarcastic. And then as her plot developed over the course of the year, I thought it was completely fascinating. And then she gets this grace note at the end with Whitaker by inviting him to come live with her, which is still true to her character.
Yeah.
But I thought that she was an amazing character. She wound up being one of my favorite characters on the show.
Not just that grace note. Think about the previous grace note. It's just masterful orchestra conducting. The patient that she's consumed by in the finale, the kid who overdosed, who she can't diagnose, my lizard TV brain was he's going to be revealed as the co-conspirator of the shooting. Yeah,
when you told me that, I was like, are you sure you're not on Reddit?
Well, that was my Reddit lizard brain. And that plot line was created to give her something empathetic to do.
Yeah.
To take her on a journey, which is as it should be, right? But there are still some vestigial, just knee-jerk broken brain stuff that I can't quit in terms of watching television and processing it.
The two kind of exhale moments of the season take place. One basically repeats the opening of this whole first season, where Robbie finds Abbott up on the roof a little too close to the edge, and they have a daytime conversation at 7 a.m., 6 a.m. or whatever it is. And now we're at 9 p.m. and Abbott finds Robbie up on the roof, and they have a conversation about what they just experienced that day. I thought that was a beautiful piece of acting by both actors and a beautiful piece of writing. I love the fact that Robbie was like, just please stop talking. You know what I mean?
And Noah gave us some good insight into that scene that we don't want to step on.
Don't want to step on that. I also really adored the conclusion of Dana's arc on this season. Her putting the pictures in her like the perfect jean jacket that woman would be wearing, and kind of like silently cleaning out her desk in case she's not coming back.
Mm-hmm.
And then her last conversation with Robbie, in front of the pictures of all the doctors who had passed away.
Yeah.
And I thought that was remarkable. The Langdon stuff is going to be really interesting. I'll be very curious to see two things in the second season that I wanted to ask you about. One is how many plot lines, continue over from the first season, specifically Langdon and his, need for rehabilitation.
And for what it's worth, Scott Gemmell apparently just blurted out at a panel last week that season 2 would be 10 months ahead.
Sure.
At over 4th of July weekend. And
Sure.
Noah speaks a little bit about that.
And then also broadly speaking, like whether or not Robbie is going to be Jack Bauer and they're going to kind of keep putting him through the ringer, or is he going to be Abbott one season and someone else is kind of in the center?
Right.
Like, it'll be really interesting to see what they do with that character and whether they're like, yeah, on another day, it might not be the craziest day of all time.
Well, the other thing that they can do now by building out their cast and ensemble is that the 15 hours, already, so basically they had said, we'll do 12 hours to mimic a 12-hour shift. And our guy, Casey Bloys, was like, give me 15. Give me more hours of this show. And so then they were like, well, this is going to go longer than a shift. So what do we do? By building out the night shift characters, they can do a split shift season. And maybe that's where they're headed. It won't require emergency overtime in the emergency room to keep some of our main characters there or to keep characters around,
Right.
which is a really smart save for them and solve for them going forward. I think the Langdon stuff is worth noting and worth tracking because ultimately the show is really, really invested in a kind of boots on the ground, sober realism to as much as it can be. Obviously the cases, there's a lot of cases and there's a lot of variety to the cases and that's the fun. If you know what I mean in terms of like story creation, that's fun. But this isn't the kind of show, and it's reassuring to know that it's not, that if Langdon comes back and acts heroically, Robbie's going to be like, forget protocol and procedure. I trust you now because you went through it with me. So I'm curious. I feel like that told us everything we need to know in terms of being concerned about storyline. Sure. I also just loved let's talk about two things. You said the measles thing happened at the end, but I do think one of the biggest messages of this first season, and one that really sticks with me, is that there is no off season, there is no end of episode, there is no pause for an emergency room in a major city.
Yeah,
that was so artfully done about the measles stuff, and that was written and filmed before it actually became
before the big comeback,
ripped from the headline.
Yeah.
So it predicted, measles summer. Was that it was deployed both in service of Jesus Christ, this never ends, but also so that it would be twinned with Robbie's absolute work to the bone. So he does behave kind of like a lunatic.
Yeah.
And then that the show gave us, remember like week 2 or 3 when we were still just trying to feeling our way through it, like we really liked it. But I feel like you mentioned early on, one of your favorite types of storylines or scenes in ER would be like, the doctor shooting hoops on the weekend, or Carter or
Sure.
Dr. Green waiting for the L in the snow.
Getting to see their apartments, getting to see like random little things. Yeah, what car they pull up in.
Pretty artfully done that it gave us insight into Whitaker's actual home life, such as it is. Santos's attitude, also her talking about where and how she lives, and then the scene in the park to let everybody have
a beer,
a post-shift beer. We were joking about this. I'm like, could you imagine how good that hit?
The first one, I wouldn't even count as a beer.
No.
The first one would be like, it would just be gone instantaneously, and then I would be like, and now we start.
The first one, I said like you would just crunch down on like a Skittle.
Yeah.
Like you don't think you'd have time to open it. Also glad to see that our home state apparently has more lax open carry laws for drinks than it used to.
Well, I think they're pretty permissive. Although, like McKay almost got put in jail.
Yeah, they let her go. And then the cops come back around and they're like, look, we saved a lot of people. Can we drink this Iron City, please, on my walk home? I thought it was also very, very subtly done, the reveal of Abbott's prosthetic.
Yes.
Right, which suggests
I thought that was very, very tasteful.
We've been talking about how he seems to have military training or experience, and that was borne out.
The only thing I was really hoping for was Collins being like, I just turned my phone on.
You're like, hey guys, what's up? I forgot my hoodie. What's the line that Robbie says? This place will break your heart, but it's also full of miracles.
Yeah.
Speaking of things that will break your heart and also full of miracles, before we get into the Noah thing, I did feel like it's relevant to the Pitt conversation that a lot of talks that I've had, like in the last week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, like general meetings on projects I have, just conversations with people in the industry.
No big deal.
There is not really. I'll let you know when it becomes a big deal. But there is a tiny, I know this is rare for this moment in world history, a tiny flicker of optimism. And it's not necessarily tied to, oh, my friend's getting a deal, or this show is going, or this is actually being shot here. I thought it was interesting and significant that a lot of these conversations are tied to a few shows are hitting now.
Mm-hmm.
A few shows are working now.
We're in a pretty... We have an embarrassment of riches for the first time in a while.
But it's not just that you and I are busy like watching shows and we have a lot of things to watch. It's that specifically shows like Nobody Wants This, at the end of last year, The Pitt is referenced all the time. Adolescence, obviously,
yeah.
and I think in a we'll know in a week or two. But if your friends and neighbors joins this, but like,
I think you can expect The Last of Us to be a gargantuan hit. Yeah.
The Last of Us will be a gargantuan hit. But the reason I'm mentioning those 4 shows is that they are, the Crichton estate may disagree, but they are original ideas that were developed and executed to a degree of success that has been given beyond return of investment from the people.
And The Pitt and Nobody Wants This shoots in LA.
And they shoot in LA. And what those successes do is actually can grow in the sense that
it's a copycat industry. So if it's like
you're no. What I'm trying to say is the executives greenlight and take a bet on something relatively original that can potentially prove to the actual mega lords of industry and tech lords who control all this now, that we should trust these guys a little. That sometimes we can let them cook and develop something, and maybe they'll give
Good
a
luck
little.
With that.
I'm saying that generally in the world, we are clinging to any.
I thought you were going to say that there
and
was going to be like 15 more hospital shows, and
there already are. I mean, we're ignoring Pulse.
Yeah.
Like there already are. That the copycat thing will never go away, and sometimes relatively good things can come from that. I just mean that at a moment when we're just like clamoring for any flicker of hope, I thought it was interesting that the conversations that were hope-based weren't that had some degree of optimism were somehow holding onto a kernel of creativity.
Yeah.
Where most, to be honest, even 50% optimistic conversations have really just been about like, well, Minecraft is a hit, so maybe there are other video games. That generally is how these talks go, but these shows in particular have sparked a different kind of conversation.
I think also, I would say like, I mentioned this to Noah, so I don't want to get too into this, but like Adolescence and The Pitt are the kind of defining shows of the year for me right now. And I think part of the reason why people have reacted so strongly to both of these shows for very different reasons is that they are seeing things that they're closer to real life and contemporary life and some of the issues that people deal with on a daily basis. The characters on screen seem like characters you might know or people you might meet. And I think it's a much wider spectrum of human behavior going on.
Yes.
And honestly, I would even say that about White Lotus as well. For as much as White Lotus is considered this like far off, only the highest up of the 1% can afford to go to these things. That's true. But the behaviors within those families, some brothers jerking off brothers aside, like it's about friendship. It's about families. It's about love. It's about betrayal. It's about what am I supposed to do with my life? And doesn't have to be about like, we need to solve this video game puzzle to get to the next level to then tease the next season and possibly 3 spinoffs of whatever. And I think that style of storytelling has a place. Some of those shows are incredible. We're going to be talking about Andor in April, but at the end of April. But it's been really cool to see stuff that looks like life on screen.
I love that as a manifesto. I believe in it. I also, which camera is on? Tune in Monday for our review of a video game show about zombies. Also, quick follow-up before we get into Noah.
Yeah.
If the Colossus Corporation, and you're not a shareholder, right? Like we should disclose
I'm
those
actually
things.
not even sure.
Fair. Fair after this week. Had they announced that they had 2 new direwolves and their names were Dr. Robbie and Amanda Pete, would your whole opening monologue have been different? Would you have been like, I
wouldn't be here. I would be petting direwolves.
I love it.
All right, let's get into our interview with Noah Wyle.
Noah Wyle was here.
Noah Wyle, let's go.
That was great.
All right, thanks to Kaya for producing. We will be back on Monday talking Last of Us and a bunch of other stuff. Thank you for listening to The Watch. Thank you to Noah Wyle. And thank you to you, Andy Greenwald.
Oh, am I still here for this part?
Sure.
I thought we were pretending I wasn't.
No.
That's why I was being quiet. I thank you, Chris.
Thanks. We are very honored to have Noah Wyle joining us here on The Watch. We've been huge fans of this show all season, Noah, so it's a real pleasure to get to talk to Dr. Robbie himself here in studio.
You can't tell, but I'm blushing.
We can tell. We're on video, I think.
Then you can't tell.
I'm going to make you blush a little bit more because a couple months ago, we finally, after 13 years, opened up a consistent email inbox for the podcast.
To be clear, Chris opened it. I've still not
To be
been
clear,
given
Kaya
access.
opened it. But the first thing I think around when we did it was right when the Pitt was coming on. And so it's a small sample size. The amount of emails that we got, not about us, not about like, hey, great joke, Chris, bad take, Andy, anything like that, from medical professionals emailing 2 idiots from Philadelphia who have nothing to say about, the healthcare industry, being like, you guys, thank you for talking about the Pitt. This show is the realest thing we've ever seen. It represents actual daily life of emergency room doctors and nurses, of the healthcare industry right now. And how much it meant to people in that space was mind-blowing. And I can only imagine you get that every day, like when you're walking around. And like, what's that like to feel that kind of response? Because people like something, people don't like something, but to have something mean something to people must be pretty intense.
It's somewhat multi-layered because I'll be honest and say that a lot of the response that we're getting was tied to the intentionality of the project. This is what I wanted to have happen. But I always want this to have happen. And it never happens. You always want the work to have impact. You always want to have it resonate. This particular time at bat, it was a little bit more important than usual because of the stakes involved and the people that we're talking about. But I also think it speaks to the volcanic amount of pent-up emotion among practitioners who have been suppressing a lot since COVID and not been able to give context to it to their families, not been able to give context to it to themselves. And then suddenly you put something on TV that just pulls the cork and it reminds them enough of their daily life that it opens the floodgates or allows people to turn to their spouse and say, is this really what you do all day? Is this what you see? And so it's that feeling seen, feeling heard aspect that feels really, really gratifying and really rare. So I wanted it. I didn't expect it. Now that we're getting it, it's pretty intense. And every day, my inbox is a bit of a lightning rod for people sharing experiences and letting me know what the show brings up for them. And that's really gratifying and powerful.
I would imagine that since your time on ER, medical professionals have come and talked to you about things, or people who are not medical professionals have come and asked you to look at rashes they have or other things on their body. Is it fair to say that maybe the change in perception of the medical field during COVID is one of the things that led you back into scrubs?
100%. I stayed out of scrubs for the longest time.
Yeah.
And had no interest in putting a stethoscope around my neck. Mostly because I felt that was hallowed ground and traveled road, and I didn't think I could do it any better, and neither did John or Scott Gemmell and John Wells. So even when we got back together to talk about the need of telling another story in this arena, all we were hyper conscious of was fucking up the legacy and, embarrassing ourselves in the attempt. And at that time, a lot of shows were rebooting themselves and the optics of it were really kind of inelegant. It all looked like kind of going for one more squeeze on the old cash cow. And that's not what we were trying to do. So we were very thoughtful about how to go about it and just decided, let's hide ourselves in accuracy. Let's embed ourselves in realism and try to push the envelope on what we can do and show that we were never able to do and show because of standards and practices and working on a network. Now with the streamer, you have a lot more colors to paint with.
That said, this show, The Pitt, is literally not ER. It is also legally not ER.
Thank you
we're
for saying so.
But when it was described, even just the log line, and we heard about it, I feel like I regret this. I think it was clearly a mistake, but I think there was kind of a knee-jerk assumption that, okay, now it's on streaming, so now they can show more. So the show is going to be more gory or more in your face or more intense. The other side of it was, they're just trying to recreate, and I say this all the time, the 30 Rock joke about let's recreate 1997 by science or magic. Can you talk about the process of making a show that does show things that ER couldn't show and uses words that ER couldn't say, but also The Pitt never ever forgets the humanity of the characters, and week to week was reminding us of why we fell in love with TV in the first place. And I think it's a really remarkable balancing act that you guys were able to pull off. It's something that is radical, it is intense, it is new, but it feels like coming home in a really wonderful way.
Well, I have to give a lot of credit to Jon Wells for that one. I think, because you're allowed to play with all these new toys doesn't mean you should. And so discretion and taste become, the operative words. And Jon has always had incredible taste. And he's always been extremely knowledgeable about storytelling. And that's what comes first. More than any of the toys comes the heart of the story and the heart of the character. Even when he directs, he comes into the scene first and says, okay, what's the point of view here? Who do I care the most about in this scene? And let's organically block the scene from that point. So it's always inside out with him. And I think that audiences have gotten extremely sophisticated in their viewing habits, extremely adept at recognizing narrative tropes and devices. And Jon doesn't even care about how smart you are. He's just going right for your heart. And it works.
The genre itself, the television medical show, is very durable. I watch them for the detective shows. I watch them for the soap operas. But I noticed really early on, talking with friends about this show, that for as much as it obviously shines a light on what's going on in the medical profession, that it occurred to me in a way that it hadn't before, how everybody is touched by illness, injury, whatever it is. Like, you have been in the hospital, you've got somebody in the hospital.
You're going to say goodbye to someone
You're going to say goodbye to somebody in the hospital, and how, I don't know why I hadn't thought of it before, but it is like the great uniting
also
church.
Also because we're old now.
Yeah, I know, right.
This is the universal arena. This is where it all happens. It's so funny. We did a storyline, episode 4, where we had adult children saying goodbye to their elderly parent. And then in episode 11, we had a birth. Birth and death. Pretty ubiquitous experiences for all of us, and yet it would seem like we revolutionized something by showing it in real time. We watch death all the time on television. We consume it daily, and yet when you slow it down to actual pace, it's very jarring. And when you photograph what birth really looks like, it seems to be mind-blowing.
Well, I wonder whether or not the two shows that have really defined this year so far for me are the Pitt and Adolescence. And I wonder whether or not people are craving seeing not necessarily even themselves as much as their stories, or seeing things that they recognize from their lives on screen in a way that maybe they hadn't over the last couple of years.
I think that's fair. I mean, there's a lot of great stuff on TV right now, and I'm enjoying a lot of it. But sometimes when you're living in dystopian times, you don't want to double down with your content viewing on dystopian fare. So I have a feeling that the Pitt is benefiting a little bit from being a lighthouse at the moment and reminding people that there are very heroic people out there in the trenches who are going to continue to treat people who are ill and sick despite how many broken parts they may have. They are coming to work every day to patch ours together.
Episode 4, I'm glad you brought it up because we wanted to ask you about that specifically. That was an episode that hit like a freight train, and I know that you were... you've been creatively involved in the entire project, but I believe you were the credited writer on that episode.
I wrote 4 and 9.
And can we use that episode as a way to talk about your increased creative involvement in the show?
Sure,
and why that was your story that you wanted to tell, and even how you ended up putting the beautiful Hawaiian saying into the episode, which I think has spread like wildfire. And people are referencing this episode and that message quite a bit.
And you've written on the last couple of shows you've done, right? Like Falling Skies.
I have.
Yeah.
I wrote more subversively on Falling Skies.
What's up with the skies
I believe
falling?
that's uncredited writing.
Yeah.
But it gave me the confidence to think that maybe something that I thought would be good in a scene could play in a scene. And then when Librarians and Leverage came around, I jumped at the chance to be part of those staffs. And it's not an easy college to break into, especially when you come in through the acting door. But I really love it. I love that I can do it from home around my kids and my wife. And I love going into kind of a fugue state with it. And I love the collaboration of a writing room. I love the pollination of ideas and the politics of the room. It's all very interesting to me. I'm extremely gratified to be working with this group because they are tremendously talented.
And specifically, the Hawaiian saying, was that something that you had come across in your life? Did you bring that into the room, or did that just fall in your episode?
Well, episodes are assigned randomly. Yeah. I didn't know that I would be writing a second one, and I wanted an early one so I could get it to bed before we started production. So Scott Gemmell, our showrunner, wrote the first 3, and then I took the first available one after that. And there are things that are on the board, outline beats that you're trying to hit. I had been invited to not participate, but to observe a taping of this online educational compendium called MRAP that was founded by a man named Dr. Mel Herbert, who's a technical advisor to our show. And while I was watching them tape this segment, I met Dr. Ira Bryrock, who wrote a book called The 4 Things That Matter Most, which is a compendium of experiences that he has had as a physician attending end of life and recognizing that these 4 significant things, simple things, if said, can really aid people in the grief process. His 4 Things That Matter Most is based on Ho'oponopono, the Hawaiian ritual. They're slightly different, but I wanted to blend them together because the book is terrific and the ritual is terrific. And I have received a lot of mail from people who are either experiencing end of care with their parents or have recently lost a parent, and they said that was extremely healing for them. So I was really happy to put that out there.
Let's go a little bit under the hood with how the show gets put together, both as a writer and then as an actor and working in production. So told mostly, more or less to the second in real time, it feels like, with some, like 40-second gaps or whatever between episodes. So how does the structure, the act breaking, the actual script of an episode of The Pitt differ from a typical episode of television that you've acted on that makes it?
The very first difference was we hired Nina Ruscio to build us a set before we started to write. Because of the real-time format, we needed to know how long it took to get from one room to another and how wide the hallways were going to be and whether you'd be in a sight line from one room to another if we were going to try to write for something that required it. It couldn't be arbitrary. We couldn't hand a blocking plan to a director during their prep that didn't work logistically, and we couldn't put 3 or 4 people in the same room. So we had to make sure that everything was spaced out.
Like you can't be writing towards, sorry to cut you off, you can't be writing towards a Dr. Robbie and Langdon collision argument like that happens, screaming fight, unless you know you have a place for them to be having it.
Exactly.
Right? That's remarkable to think about.
Exactly. So that was atypical. We had a big blueprint on the wall that we all took home with us that we memorized to make sure we understood the set and its spatial relationships to time. And then it is Dr. Joe Sachs's turn to open up what he euphemistically calls his tickle trunk and share with us the benefit of his 4-decade career in emergency medicine and his sphere of relationships. And we just start talking about cases. And then he organizes expert meetings with there's an organization called Hollywood Health that Roberta Kruger runs, and she brokers talks with people from every aspect of healthcare. So if we want to know about trans rights in healthcare, we talk to GLAD. If we want to know about the recovery road for a physician addicted to narcotics, how to get your license back, we talk to an expert on recovery. We talk to people that deal in IT ransomware for hospital protections against bad actors. We talk to everybody. And the last question we ask them is, what would you like to see on TV? What is it that isn't on TV that should be? And what would be really bad for us to put on TV that would be countercurrent to your work? And then we just take all that and start breaking it out. as we talked about earlier, because of the 15-hour format, we have to break all the season at once. There's no sort of making it or up as you go or course correcting. So we kind of need to know where we're going to end, where everybody's mini arc is going to take them, how this day is going to affect them, all the way down to the smallest day player.
I think that what you're just speaking to is the thing that I can't get over, and you may have heard us talk about this again and again, week after week, is there's a commitment to the project that you had to make so early on. And we're sitting here, in week 11, week 12, week 13, feeling the accumulated relationships between the characters, between ourselves and this show, and we feel them paying off. But you sitting on the Warner Brothers lot years before we're actually seeing this, have to make a bet that we are going to care about Dana as much as we do by the time that she is assaulted. That we are going to, the shoes that drop in the finale, and we can talk about some of the specifics, are going to hit.
That was even more of a balancing act when we talk about the finale.
Yeah.
That's because we went to Pittsburgh in September to shoot our exteriors, which meant we shot Robbie walking into work, Robbie chasing David down the street, going up to the helipad to get some blood, and Robbie on the roof with Abbott.
Did you do the exteriors of like the ambulances arriving for Pitt Fest in Pittsburgh, or was that?
That was all St. Joe's exterior ambulance bay in Burbank. So,
but you're saying you shot both sides of the Robbie and Abbott.
I'm saying
on
the
roof.
same day we went up and shot Robbie and Abbott in the morning, and then we waited for the nightfall, and then we went up and shot the scene at night, and then went across the street and shot the scene in the park. The scene in the park and the scene on the roof were just sides. They weren't scripts. We didn't have those written yet. In September, we were still writing, I think, episodes 5 or 6 at that point. But we needed to audition actors with scenes that showed the full range of their emotional abilities. So we wrote sides that reflected heavy emotion so we could cast Sean Hattasey, so we could cast all these wonderful actors. But when I was on the roof with Sean and he said, "Nice speech, wish I'd given it," there was no speech written. I had no idea if I was talking to the press, if I was talking to myself.
It also adds color to Robbie saying, "Please stop talking."
Yeah,
I don't even know what you're talking about.
Let's like make this a little bit more minimal.
But we shot this lovely scene and it turned out so well. We were like, okay, that's where we have to get to. We got to get Robbie up on that roof. And so for that part, for 13, 14, and 15, it was being very mindful of where we needed to land the plane and making sure we lined up the runway appropriately.
How much did you guys allow for the possibility that, something that happens on TV shows sometimes, which is that somebody blows your mind or does something that you didn't know that they could do or is funnier than you expected?
Or chemistry sparks between two characters.
Like how much?
That happened a little bit. There was a little course correction and a little enhancement of relationships. And there were some players that got bumped up as they proved themselves to be incredibly... the character of Donahue, for example, Brandon came in to his wardrobe fitting and stopped by medical boot camp to watch what we were doing. And then he just hung out. And then when we needed anything done, he just jumped in and volunteered. And I remember saying early on, I really like this guy. I like his attitude. We should throw him some stuff. And then he nailed his first couple scenes. And it was like, okay, let's write more for him. He's great. And so there's a little bit of that promoting from within, and it was very much a meritocracy. And as you're watching people's strengths and weaknesses, you kind of want to lean into their strengths and away from weaknesses. But this cast was so solid, there weren't many weaknesses.
But one of the things that it taught me about watching TV and what I love about TV is that names like Abraham Ben-Ruby and Deezer D, like these are names that are burned into my brain because these people were with me and with us every week, and they were not the credited stars of the show when ER started. And so I wonder how much of that institutional memory you and Jon carry over into this. Because now it's not just that, Dana, for example, or any of the other nurses or the security guy, I'm like, I love these people. I love Princess. I want to know where they are at any given moment. It's that then 2/3 of the way through your show, the night shift shows up, and I'm like, I would watch a series about Dr. Shen. That's fine.
Yeah.
I love him. Where has he been?
Shen? Come on, smell spinoff there.
But like that,
having nurses talk in Tagalog, having those guys betting on the ambulance crash reinforces what is true about hospitals, which is they are run by support staff. Nurses and techs and PAs and RTs run emergency rooms, and the doctors try to keep as many patients going through there as possible. but they really are the fabric of the place.
I read an interview with Catherine Lanassa.
Did you see I mentioned RTs? RTs are very unhappy with us. We don't have any RTs on the show.
Oh,
And
no.
they're letting us know. Season 2, RT Revenge.
Season 2 Revenge. of the
Season 2, the
RT.
Pitt, the RTs.
Yeah.
I saw Catherine Lanassa did an interview talking specifically about the arc that her character goes on, but just in general about the freedom, the collaboration that she had to like, come up with a backstory for Dana. And I was curious about, to the extent that you can share, like, did you do the same work on Robbie and
Yes and no. It was interesting when we started to write the show. It was, okay, do we wake up with Robbie? Where does he wake up? Does he wake up in an apartment or a townhouse or a house? Is it clean? Is it nice? Is he alone? Is he with the dog? What's on the wall? Does he take a shot of whiskey or a protein shake? Every question you ask, you define the character, but you're also limiting the character to a degree in terms of his relatability to the audience. And so the decision was, no, we'll get to know him in his professional capacity because that's how a patient would get to know him. And as the day progresses, you learn more and more little nuggets about his personal life, but not so much that you're pigeonholing him, identifying him, or not being able to relate to him. So I kept a lot of that very vague, but personally built a very inner, rich life and backstory to feed the emotional journey that I was going to be going on.
Who do you credit most with, and maybe it's a shared credit, with the balancing act that the show does so well between the necessary happenstance of fiction, like McKay's ex shows up with a broken ankle with her son. Like it's a TV show. Of course, people who are connected to our doctors are going to walk through the doors when we're watching the show. But also what I found to be a really admirable commitment to randomness at times as well. And that played out with, David is not responsible for Pitt Fest. There was a misdirect at the very end that I really welcomed, which is the overdose patient that Santos is treating. My TV brain is saying, he's the co-conspirator of the mass shooting. There's something here. They're showing us something. And the thing you were showing us was that Santos can be human, in that way, and can relate to someone and heal someone on a personal level, which we had not seen. So who do you credit with that balancing act of we have to generate plot, we have to have coincidence, but also we have to...
I would give it jointly to the personalities in the room. I think that's how we all complement each other so well. Scott Gemmell has a wicked sense of humor and is really great at writing dialogue and humor. Simran Baidwan is a masterful storyteller when it comes to sort of interpersonal relationships and plot lines. And then you've got Dr. Joe Sachs going, keep it real. That's not what we do. That's not what we say. That would never happen. So it's this wonderful balance. And then you say to Joe, well, not to you maybe, but there are a lot of kinds of doctors out there. So it's this sort of, we have checks and balances on each other. We all know what it should be in the end. And I think it's a cross-pollination of everybody's input that gets us to that balancing act. And then the final editor, the final arbiter is John Wells. Everything goes past him, and if it passes his muster, it gets on TV.
Let's talk a little bit about sort of like the last couple batch of episodes. Obviously, Pitt Fest, but then one of the things that I really treasured about this season was the slight decompression, and you're kind of going with these people. For as much as when you walk into that hospital with Robbie and you're getting his kind of like, all right, I'm looking at the board and I'm prepping people and everything, you also get the slow kind of decompression of the day, which might run counter to the way a TV season is necessarily structured, where it would maybe Pitt Fest would be one episode, that's the penultimate episode, and then there's like a cliffhanger of a finale. So how important was it to honor, I guess, the original structure of like, this is a day in the life, not necessarily a season of TV, because that's what it felt like, and I think it was more powerful for it.
Initially, we were pitching a 12-episode season to match a 12-hour shift, and Max asked for 15 because they wanted a larger episodic order, and then Pitt Fest allowed us to kind of expand the narrative into the 15 hours. Ask me that question.
Well, it's just basically like, I love the fact that there were essentially 2 episodes to come down from Pitt Fest.
I think it would have felt irresponsible of us to end on a cliffhanger after the investment that we'd asked for all season long, to stay with us in real time on our feet. Once we get to go home, let's all go home.
Yeah.
And let's all go home and reflect on what we've all been through. And when we come back, it'll be farther downfield, and this will now be in everybody's consciousness, right? Robbie had Adamson. Now we all have an Adamson. We've all been through Pitt Fest. And how we bring these characters back and walk them through the next stages of their lives and careers, as long as we stay truthful to the who are they and where are they and why are they, I think we'll be in good shape. So the resistance to feel the need to blow something up, to go bigger and badder in the second season, that's what we're feeling right now is, oh my God, what are they going to want to see now? And it's hopefully they'll just want to see some more sutures and they want to see some more human stories and some more what's happening out there.
I think that the pacing of the last few episodes gave us what's lingering with me is one of the more powerful images and moments, which is, all the red tags and pink tags, and Pitfest has been mostly processed through to the OR, and then it's time to open it up again. There is no off. There is no end of episode really in life or on your TV show.
No, just another shift coming through, and they'll never get ahead of the problem. You can't get ahead of this problem. There's always going to be a full waiting room right now. There's always going to be boarding patients, and they're always going to be understaffed. That's the new healthcare.
You mentioned, and I feel like we're skipping around the finale. I do want to ask about the finale, but you talked about the temptation to go bigger for season 2. I believe you and the creative team confirmed a few days ago that we're jumping 10 months.
Yeah, Scott.
He just blurted.
You ask a good Canadian a question, and I guess he feels compelled to answer it. Suddenly I was like, oh, we're just giving up everything, are we?
Yeah.
Yes, it's been confirmed. We're going to jump about 10 months into the future and plot the show July 4th weekend, holiday weekend.
Is the temptation similar to what you were saying before about showing Dr. Robbie before or after the shift? Has there been much conversation that you feel comfortable sharing about whether the first episode begins an hour before the shift? Whether we are at home with people more, whether we go more into their lives?
I don't mind confessing, this is a wonderful example of how smart Scott is. I came in season 2 and thought, okay, well, 15 hours, it's an unwieldy number. I wonder if we could play with something kind of creative where we just take that first hour and call it commute, and basically we pick 5 characters, get a sense of what their home life is that they have to leave and compartmentalize in order to get to work. How do they get to work? And we end that first hour with the time card punch. And then on the back end, we bookend it and we get a sense of closure and how they have to compartmentalize the day to walk into their family lives. And Scott looked at me, and all the other writers were nodding. And Scott goes, yeah, I don't know. We'll probably have to do something like that if we go 4 or 5 seasons. But if we if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I like rules. Rules are meant to be broken, and they're really there to service the writing. But I think our discipline this year is to do what we did last year, but better.
I think that's wise. I feel compelled to share this with you if you haven't seen it. I mentioned it on the pod last week, but one of the favorite. This is already a cursed phrase. One of my favorite tweets recently. Was this. I don't know if you saw this. Season 1 episode of a medical drama. Professional and personal tensions are high during a stressful day at the hospital. Season 9 episode of a medical drama. There's a new patient at the hospital and his name is Dracula.
Dr. Acula.
Exactly.
No, it's not actually not a terrible idea.
But that's
an Ed Wood?
Yeah.
That's an Ed Wood
But there
poll.
is a reality to that in terms of
100%.
But you do have
we were dropping helicopters around Ambulance Bay by 15 on ER.
Exactly.
Yeah. But I think that's another networks like spectacle.
Mm-hmm.
And to bring viewers back, you need to tell them it's bigger and better and than ever before. That kind of hype and hyperbole is attendant to all programming. And hopefully we'll have a good sizzle clip package to sort of sell the show with season 2, just off of the drama that you find in an emergency room and the fact that you already care enough about these characters to care about how they're going to be successful in their careers and in their day.
Do you look back when you see, say, the kind of commotion that's happening around Taylor Dearden, right? Is there almost like a full circle feeling for you where you're like, man, I remember when I was her age and entering this world of being on a hospital show, but also my character becoming kind of larger than life to people?
Yes, not specifically with Taylor though, because Taylor has grown up in and around this, so she has a little bit of her 10,000 hours in early. I feel that more with somebody like a Shabana Aziz or even to a certain extent Patrick Ball, where I'm watching, or Garen Howell.
Yeah.
Even though these guys have done work before, really good work, this is a whole new sort of experience. And it's wonderful to watch. It's wonderful to watch them handle it so well. I was very grateful to the fact that I had Anthony Edwards, George Clooney, and Eric LaSalle, all 10 years older than me, acting like a big brother and steering me away from trouble and steering me back into professionalism. I've tried to be that sort of available resource, but it's amazing how little they need it. They're really sharp.
This might be a tough question to ask since you're so involved in every facet of the show, but I just wonder if you have a moment and you ever step back and consider not just the strength of your performance and your ideas that you contribute to the show, but you being on the show in terms of audience's relationship with you, Noah, the actor, playing a doctor in our lives, and what you bring to us with giving us the opportunity to see you do it again. I don't know if that's a very meta question.
No, it wasn't lost on me. Well, first of all, I was extremely grateful that Max greenlit the show with me in the lead. I was surprised at that. But I knew what attendant baggage I bring to playing a doctor, and I knew that I was going to already be able to trade on a history of trust and goodwill, and that was part of the thesis. We're presenting somebody that, oh, he's a good doctor. Oh, he's a really smart guy. Oh, he's really compassionate. Oh, look how empathetic he is. Oh, he's so capable. Wow, he's so dedicated. He doesn't even have time to pee. This guy is fantastic. This guy is great. I want him to be my doctor. Oh, shit, he's on the ground.
Yeah.
Oh, shit, he's crying. Like, he's human. He's frail. He's fragile. He's a good metaphor for our healthcare system and even the best practitioners. So that was the arc we were going for. And I made it easier to have that arc play out because of the goodwill that audiences already kind of bring to the table with me.
Yeah, but I love the way Abbott and Robbie get inverted by the end of the day, where, not only very real, like on the roof wise, but you kind of realize by 14 or 15, Robbie's not being reckless per se, but Abbott's like, hey man, take a sec, you don't have to show the measles case parents to the morgue.
He's flying on autopilot.
Yeah.
And he has no filter, no professional mask anymore, no ability to be politic. And no ability to go home after this shift and lie to himself and say there isn't a problem. So where we go from now is him accepting or resisting treatment, all the different modalities of treatment available, which one is going to take effect, and to underscore that doctors aren't always the best patients.
I was looking over at the notes that I was writing when I was watching the finale, and I was struck by the fact that I wrote, this is the most stressful episode of the season for me, even though one of the reasons I was enjoying it so much is that I felt like I understood the show. I trusted the show. I didn't think a car was crashing into the ER. I didn't think that there was going to be some secondary mass casualty event. What was stressing me out more than anything else was that Robbie and to a lesser degree Mohan were losing it. And that the loose cannon, what you were just describing, that something could go wrong for them was what was animating me and making me sit on the edge of my seat. It wasn't the medicine anymore. It was the people.
No, you don't want them to say or do the wrong thing. You don't want them to get hurt. And you see how fragile they are at that point.
I only have one more question, which is, what's a crike tray?
A crike tray?
Yeah. Because every time somebody was like, start a crike tray or I'm going to get the crike tray, I was like, well, it doesn't seem like I ever want to hear those words.
All about the airway in an emergency room. Are they breathing? Airway, breathing, circulation, the ABCs of emergency medicine. So when you're trying to get an airway and there's any kind of occlusion and you can't get a tube through, then you have to have to make your hole a little lower, and that's like in the cricothyroid is where you make your incision to put
the surgeons are so quick with the
Don't you remember on MASH when Hawkeye did it with a ballpoint
I
pen?
do, but
I'll never forget it. But I didn't. But Chris, to be fair, patients who come into the Pitt ER, they're pretty chatty. I feel like they don't seem to mind what they're hearing. Maybe that's because the ketamine hits. Like
every time Jon Wells is asked about, so now you know a lot about medicine. What's it like when you go to the hospital? He says, terrifying. I know just enough to know what they're talking about, and I can't do anything about it.
My biggest medical question isn't so much the education, literally the crash course that the cast had to have to use these words and make it sound like they've used them 100 times, and the practice movements, which are so amazing and we take for granted. I mean, that goes back to ER, the choreography of it. It's how many pairs of rubber gloves did you wear?
Oh yeah, I was going to ask if the hand sanitizer was real.
How are your hands?
Yeah.
Well, I'm conscious of waste, so I try to reuse gloves as often as possible. So I'll take them off in the scene, then I'll pick them off the floor and turn them right back out.
What does Dr. Sachs think about that?
It's not the most sanitary thing that we do. But then we got all that hand sanitizer sitting right there. That was, from the jump, you got to wash your hands on the way into a room, and you got to wash your hands on the way out of the room. And we did that because we couldn't do some of the other things that are ubiquitous in hospitals. Like we couldn't all wear masks all the time. You wouldn't see our faces if we wore masks as often as you should wear a mask in a hospital. So to underscore the need to stay hygienic and clean, we used the hand sanitizer and a lot of gloves.
Again, we're not hunting for spoilers, but we are curious about you and your curiosity and your creative mind here. What are you hoping to show with Robbie in future seasons, or do with him in a second 15-hour shift? I think that, just to use as an example, it wasn't just the collapse that was so meaningful, it's that he fell back on the Shema, and that there was a glimpse of some belief system that was echoing or still, in his brain.
To me, that's the elegance of giving just a nugget every once in a while. Is in episode 4, Robbie says, that he's Jewish, but it's a throwaway line. And then in another later episode, somebody asks him about his talking to God, and he says, "Oh, we haven't spoken in a while." Another episode, you find out he was raised by his grandmother, but he never mentions his parents. So you've got 3 pieces of information that he's Jewish by faith, but it's an estrangement, and it's tied more to a grandmother than it is to how he was raised by his parents. And then when he's on the floor in his deepest despair, he falls back on something that he recited with his grandmother for comfort every day. Yeah. And it's a very basic prayer. And that was my way of showing him reaching for any lifeline he could find, even if it's a semblance of faith, which felt really appropriate for the character. But again, was just specific points just to tell a sort of very subtle version of a story. And then in season 2, whether that takes more prominence or not, we're discussing now.
I wondered, not to circle back too much to that one moment, but why Whitaker? Why is it the Whitaker that
was another great conversation, because it could have been anybody that walked in. But at the same time, when you're showing extremes, in that moment, I want to see the youngest doctor who's first day, and he's wide-eyed, and he's naive, and he's aspirational, to see what it looks like on the other end of your career. And that, to me, that polarity was really poignant. And who else could get Robbie up except somebody who has the innocence of believing that he can get Robbie up?
Mm-hmm. The Bloodhound,
I throw a look at him like, hey, this, as he extends his hand to me and said something that felt like, "We need you out there, Captain." I remember thinking that Robbie would think, "You really think you can help me? That's so cute." That's so cute. And then we threw in that, I loved that little beat. Garen and I always found something wonderful to play physically with each other. When he helps me with my feet, I just loved shoving him away from me. I just thought that was the most Robbie-esque thing I could do.
As if that kid hadn't taken on enough bodily fluids over the course of the season.
I hate asking this, but I feel like, can he never use his real accent in an interview again? Because I feel like
it's disconcerting, right?
Yeah.
First of all, this is an incredible American accent.
Yeah.
And I just think, again, you don't need to say who said this to you, but I feel like we would prefer it if he just stuck with it, just for at least the next few years.
It's, Shabana as well, with her thick Australian accent. Right. And Tracy's an English woman.
Oh, her accent's really good too.
Her accent's great.
Yeah. Yeah, they're all phenomenal. It's when you work with actors who are doing an American accent on top of all the medical jargon and stuff, it's sort of like, okay, what's the
Ginger Rogers?
Yeah, backwards and in heels. Exactly.
Now we're just in the fan cast.
I wanted to ask a little bit about at the end of this season, we find out that Whitaker sometimes stays upstairs. I think that there's a lot of unexplored space at the Pitt. There can be kind of like a pit, like a hostel up there. You guys could have.
That was the only time we left the floor except to go to the helipad. And it was such an internal debate about whether to do it, whether that was a slippery slope. But we felt earned, because we there's a lot of students who are house insecure right now, who are living, if they don't have a car, they're couch surfing as they get through their medical education. It's a big problem. There's a lot of unhoused people going to USC. John Wells' wife is involved in a project trying to get housing to students. So that was one of the storylines we cared a lot about.
Is it safe to assume that where Whitaker was staying on the higher floor, that's next to Dracula's lair, and we'll be seeing that's an Easter egg, right? We'll be seeing in future seasons.
Exactly, it's awfully creepy.
I know Chris was. I'm sorry, I'm asking this for you, but I know Chris was particularly motivated by Dr. Collins' Do Not Disturb functionality on her phone.
Deep sleeper,
very deep sleeper.
That calls.
Did that get kicked around at all?
But also, that was an interesting choice because her character made such an impact. It's a beautiful performance. The relationships that she has with Robbie, with everyone. And she's very, very good. And then she really doesn't come back. And I wondered if is that scheduling? Is that showing us how much?
The whole end of the season is just removing bearing walls from Robbie's life. You know, he leans so heavily on Collins and Langdon, and then you take them both away from him. He leans so heavily on Dana, and then she becomes compromised. And then his one last relationship to Jake is severed when he can't save his girlfriend. So it's really was more of a, let's take away all of this guy's support system and have him out there. If she had been there, I think she would have been maybe one of those voices that could have reached him. Yeah. And we didn't want him to be reachable.
Wait, last thing.
Yeah.
There, obviously, the way that Pitt Fest plays out in the show is horrifying. I did have to ask you, who played Pitt Fest? What was the event? Because it does attract a very diverse crowd of like
wide range.
MDMA
like
kids and clowns.
Yeah.
Somebody posted that very question and called attention to just what a diverse group of people
it would
were
have been
coming
like,
through.
I mean, it's beautiful.
A jam band, a new metal band.
We're assuming it's a multi-stage.
Yeah.
I see. No, right. There's the balloon animals and
we've got the petting zoo and the kid rides over here. That's what the clown is for. And then all the kids doing MDMA and raving over here.
It's a beautiful vision.
During the afternoon, too.
Big
so
fest.
it was kind of an afternoon rave. Noah, man, thank you so much for coming by.
Oh, my goodness. I told you guys before, thank you. You were early champions of the show, and you were beating the drum early, and I can't thank you enough for your enthusiasm and support. It really means a lot.
We appreciate it. It meant a lot to us as people who think about this stuff and watch this stuff to have a show that thought this deeply and beautifully about serious things.
Yeah.
What you said a moment ago was what was in our heads this whole time. We watch so much death on television, but we rarely have shows that consider what that means in our actual lives. So thanks to all of you.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.